Jesus taught in many different ways. He would take a situation, an everyday situation, not just what happens on Sundays or Wednesdays or on the Sabbath day. He would take any kind of normal activity that we all still do today. And I think it's amazing how he always picked a story or an occasion that was universal. And that didn't only happen in the first century, but would happen any century after that, including the 21st century that we live in, that there's things that happen that we could relate to. And unless we can relate to what Jesus has said, how can we see it applying to ourselves? How can we see anything that he does help us if we can't relate to it? So Jesus is very good of using situations that are universal, that are timeless, and that might be the good way to start this. So the first parable, I've done that too. The first miracle we want to look at is something that has happened that Jesus is invited to, a wedding. I think almost every one of us in here could say that we've been to a wedding or two or three or four, a bunch that we've been to, and we know it's a usually very happy occasion if everything goes smooth. If there's no storm or no wind or causing problems, and that just adds to the experience, and we all have seen that. Or let's read this, and this is probably one of the oldest things I remember from my childhood is Jesus turning water into wine. That's probably one of my oldest things we learned in Bible class when I was little about Jesus' miracle. And this is probably the first one that he does. And I think it's something that when I reread it and went over the story, I picked up things. We naturally do that. We pick up things and we see maybe the big picture of what's going on. So let's read this story about Jesus going to a wedding and things that happen there. We're going to find out the who, what, when, and why, you might say, of this wedding. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. We're kind of filling in. She's going to be a part of this. And so it was important to introduce her to this story. And she was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. All of a sudden now we see a portion of who is there. Later on, we're going to find out there's a couple of other guests that interject their opinion of what this wedding was like or what happened in this wedding. So verse 3, when the wine ran out, which we probably have seen this, the reception. And has anybody ever run out of food at the reception? It happened in mine. I had to go and order more. Everybody was hungry. It was July in a week from now, 100 degrees outside. Everybody stayed inside. Everybody was thirsty. We never had enough. And sure enough, the same thing happens. He's made it real to us. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "Son, we have no wine." And it's one of those reactions that Jesus gives in this next verse. "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" That's a legitimate question. He's not part of the wedding party. He's not responsible for providing this, I don't think. And so he gives this reaction of, "Why are you talking to me about this? This is not my problem." And I want us to notice what he says next. "My hour has not come yet." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Jesus introduces something right here at the last part of verse 4. My hour is not come. What does he mean by my hour? Is that a literal 60 minutes? What's he talking about here? I want us all to interact and think about this. Otherwise, we're not going to get anything out of it if we don't put ourselves into his shoes, into their shoes of what's happening here. Yes, sir?
To me, it seems to start with the conversation with his mother. That early in the Gospels, when the angels tell her about the one to come, she's got some questions. Angel appears to Joseph and Mary. The statement is made, she hides these things in her heart. And we have every once a brief glimpse like this where it seems to, she's making connection or remembering, and oh, this is what I was told back there 30 years ago, where it was. And she evidently already has a measure of faith or understanding that Jesus can do something about this situation or any situation.
Okay.
So
she knows her son.
She's given him.
Yeah.
The hour not yet come seems to be.
And that's Jesus' comeback to a request. What's the request here? Yes.
She asked him to do that, but my hour has not come yet. It's not time. I don't even feel this.
Very important. God, in fact, all through history has had perfect timing. There's always been the perfect timing, even providence, to the sequence of things happening exactly when we need it. Exactly, he came exactly when the world needed him, when the world was ready. The Jews had gone as far as they could go in the Old Testament law. There needed to be the next step, and it was time for that. At the fullness of time, that's another way the Bible puts this, his hour, the fullness of time, when the proper, correct time would be, perfect timing would be, he would come out and do something. Here she is. She knows who he is. From even before he was born, she knows who he is. And knows he can do something. You know, it's one of those, they've run out of wine. Can you take the hint? How many times have people said something to you, your spouse or someone close to you, and they know you, and they don't come right out and say, get up and go do this. They say, you know, there's trash. And they don't say, take it out. If I pick up on that lead right there, I understand I need to go and do that. Here she is. She's leading him. There's a need right here. She knows her son. She knows what he can do. And did this catch Jesus off guard? That he would come back and say, my hour has not come? Was he caught off guard by her asking this? The reason I say that, I firmly believe Jesus knew how his life was going to unfold. That he knew what he was going to have to go through. He knew from very young age he was about his father's business. He mentions that to his family, to his mother and his father. Here he is. The time is not quite right for this. But he goes ahead and does something.
This is going to tie in with some other different miracles or different occasions. He'll do something, and for a period he'll say, just kind of let you keep this to yourself.
We're going to get to one of those. We're going to get to one of those.
And then you keep going through the Gospels, that switches or changes.
There's all in the timing of this, of how everything is set in order. There's a pattern and there's an order of things to build up to his being led into Jerusalem as the king of the Jews. And then that crumbles just like overnight, just changes overnight. But anyhow, this is part of that. Yet, she knows her son. And she tells the servants, whatever he says, whatever he says, do. Well, let's keep reading. Now, there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. Is there anything in this next section right here that you, all of a sudden you see now that you may not have seen before? Well, something that stood out to me. Now, there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification. What is that? The Jewish rites of purification. The Jews, well, through God's help, through the Mosaical law, through all of the things they were taught, purification was a big one.
Different times or occasions that were specified. You know, like if you were a leper, been outside the camp, you had to wash yourself several times, or just within daily living before you could go into certain places.
Okay, so all of a sudden now we have these water jars. And, you know, did they get their water out of the, the Cypress Street water plant over here? Did it come out all chlorinated and clean and everything? Did they have anything like that? Cleanest thing I've ever seen is a well that my aunt and uncle had in Arkansas, up in the Ozarks, and it came out cold, but you could drink it, but they didn't recommend it, type thing. And we probably are not as strong as they were and protected from whatever might be in the water. But here they had these water, and when I think of purification jars, I just think of, what do you do? Purification. Maybe your face. What might get in these jars? Dirt. Dirt. Anything. It could be whatever's on you, get in there. And maybe they did a better job than that. Maybe they didn't get anything in it. But anyhow, that's what stood out to me, is these jars used for cleaning, not for drinking, but for cleaning purposes. Might not be perfectly clean, perfect, good water. And this is what he's using. A lot of times these miracles are so extreme from the beginning to the end that it's impossible, and maybe that's the point I'm trying to get at, is not that turning good clean water into wine, but turning dirty water into wine. It's even more difficult, if anything is difficult, with God. Anyhow, we see this, and it would be maybe more impressive. And it would be to me, once I thought about these jars being just for purification. Now, so they did it. They did what he said. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, okay, those who had filled up the pots, those who had made it their 6 pots, times 20 or 30 gallons, we're talking about 120 to 100 and some odd, 180 gallons. Doesn't it seem like a lot to you for a wedding? I mean, of course, maybe the whole town was there, no telling. And then maybe it does take gallons. It seems like they make gallons whenever we go to the wedding. Yes, sir?
A couple things. Also, this is, they've been drinking however long and however much. It's not like you just need a little. They make a bunch. When it was made, they fill these to the brim. So you talk about him performing a miracle. It's not like he could pour, concentrate something in there, add to, or trickery or deceit. They were filled to the top.
What?
And then draw them out and it's changed.
Do we see Jesus physically touching this? He tells them what to do. And then he says, what does he say? I'll back up one. And he said to them, now draw out and take it to the master. He doesn't even touch it. Here, one of these, he didn't say anything. He said, pour it in and now draw it out. And it's not what they poured in. Another impressive miracle, as if any of them are not impressive. But here we go. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said, hey, Everyone serves the good wine first. And when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine is brought in. But you've kept the good wine until now. More impressive, not only was it, have you ever tasted anything watered down? We have to water down Hayden's apple juice. And you can tell it. I can tell it when he lets me get a drink. It's watered down. Ben, come on now. Don't tell me you haven't drank from Reed's. Anyhow, this isn't watered down. This is the good stuff. This is another thing impressive about what Jesus did, his first public miracle here. This is the first of his signs that Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. We see those who knew what had happened. The bridegroom, the guy in charge, he didn't know what was going on here. He just realized this was really good. And it was out of order. It wasn't, usually when all my taste buds are gone, you give me the weak stuff, but this was just the opposite of that. But who knew what was going on? Who of the party knew what was going on? That this was a miracle. Let's list them. The servants who actually put the water in, because they knew they put the water in, and they're the ones who dipped it out. And his disciples, and to a point, the previous chapter to this, he just picked them. He just picked his disciples, or began to pick his disciples, and wow, impressive of, I'm sure Jesus' mother, his disciples, the servants. Now, do you think that anybody talked about what happened? Jesus, Nolan brought out the point later on, he tells someone he performs a miracle on, don't tell nobody, just go to the priest. Well, he didn't, I don't see it recorded here. That didn't mean he didn't say it, but it's not recorded here. But it did have a big impact on his disciples, I'm sure on the servants, and on his mother. And that's the whole purpose of these miracles, is to make an impact. Truly, this is the Son of God. That's the impact he always did. Now, when Jesus was tempted, did he have power to perform miracles at that time? Of course. I totally agree. But did he use those miracles? We don't see that. And what we're going to see is a pattern as we look through these miracles. He never does a miracle for himself. He could have done those miracles when he was hungry, when he was thirsty, when Satan tempted him. He went 40 days without eating. He could have performed a miracle and took a snack. But this was not to be. He always performed miracles for others, not for himself. Yes, sir. I always think of Jesus knowing what's going to happen before it's happened. It's kind of like watching a movie. The first time you watch it, when you're startled, all of a sudden you're startled and you were caught off guard. But what happens the second time you watch it? You know it's coming. You know it's coming, and you know, you're not caught off guard. You know you know how people are going to react. You may talk to them and say, don't do that because this guy's going to jump out. You know, we talk to the TV and try to help them out, but we already know how the story goes. Here, Jesus, I believe Jesus has that all knowledge to know how things are going to happen, how things are going to go. He knew the timing, and it wasn't quite time. But here is Mama. She knows who he is. He is the Messiah. He is going to be the Savior of his people. And I could see her, as Nicholas brought out, maybe this is a good time to start. This is a good time to show who you are. But it's not on our timeline, her timeline. It's on God's timeline, God's way of doing things. Very good point to bring out. This was on Jesus' timeline. Did he do it? Yes, he did it. And could he have made a big deal of it, like you said? Yeah, he could have. But it was not for him to do it like that. That wasn't part of his timeline. It was the beginning. The beginning. He just now picked some of his disciples, the chapter before. In John's timeline of events, how things happen, he had just picked them. How would his apostles feel if he did this miracle, but didn't make a big deal? To go with your question there, if he didn't make a big deal, how would they react to this? You know, if I was one of the apostles, I saw what had happened. You know, it's one of those. This is a big deal. Why aren't we, everybody knowing about this? Yes, ma'am. Okay, there's a word up here that points right to what you're talking about. The last word on the second line right there. His glory. He always gave God. John's style of writing in the Gospel of John, he always described Jesus doing the Father's will. Doing what the Father wanted him to do. This is what the Father had planned out. He always gave God the glory. Always gave God the credit. And that was an example of a servant. Did he even come down to the last night he was on earth? What did he do? Wash the disciples' feet. And, you know, they were blown away with him being the Messiah, the Savior, and doing that. Well, he always had this mindset of being a servant, to never take the credit, never make a big deal of himself. It was always God's will. And we see this servant attitude. Let's go to Matthew chapter 8. Here in this chapter we see Jesus beginning to talk to people, and there was always an overcrowding issue. They would all get around him, and if you get a big crowd around you, can anybody on the back side, on the outside, hear what's going on in the middle? No. It's just chaos going on. So a lot of times Jesus would get up on a mountain, Matthew chapter 5, he'd get up on the mountain where people could spread out, and people could see and people could hear what's going on. Or sometimes he would get on a boat. And many times he would get on a boat. And here's one time when he did. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And they all got on the boat. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. My wife and I went on a cruise 11 years ago, and we had 10-foot waves, and we were on a gigantic ship. And there was no sleeping going on. Here, Jesus, on much smaller boat, is sleeping during a storm. How could that happen? why would we not be sleeping? Why? Okay, let's put it in the apostles. Why were the apostles, or us, in this same situation? Why weren't they sleeping? They feared. They had seen what waves do. I remember taking a boat ride when I was a kid going duck hunting. Scary. Did we tell my mom? No. We didn't do that. You just don't do that to certain people. They can't handle it. And she just said, just tell me afterwards, or not at all. So, I mean, whitecaps splashing over 20-degree water. It was miserable. And I can put myself into that situation, and they're fearing for their life. To be able to sleep through that, you must not have that fear. And here comes back this situation of Jesus knowing how the situation was going to turn out. He knew what was going to happen. So he didn't have that fear. He didn't have that to trouble his mind as they were troubled. And he was asleep. And, I don't think the disciples had grasped yet Jesus' omnipotence of knowing everything that was going to happen, everything that was going to happen. And he was asleep. And when they went and woke him saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." They thought they were going to die. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Why would he say, "Why are you afraid?" Yes, Larry.
The question implies that they had been with Jesus enough that they should have known better. That's how I see that. They should have had faith at that point that they had been there. Otherwise, why ask them?
Exactly. Have we known in our lives enough about what God can do, what Jesus can do, that we should not be afraid? But yet, the current circumstances, the current weather, the current things still get on us. It still terrifies us. Could terrify us. Why don't we have the same thing he accused them of? They're with him. He just picked them to be his disciples. Is he going to let one of them go right here? No. He's not going to let that happen. Like you say, they've been with him long enough. They've seen what he's done. He said, you need to realize I'm not going to let anything happen to you. We hadn't got that far along that you're on your own yet. Yes. They should be able to remember this story. I think it was impactful of enough of a dangerous situation. You know how something like that is imprinted on your mind, never to forget? I'm sure this story, this occasion is on their mind for the rest of their life. And then they knew how it turned out. Very good point. How it turned out. If we trust in Jesus, have faith in Jesus, it will always work out. Very good point. So, let's continue. Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea. Well, I can't tell you the last time I used the word rebuke in my everyday life. Is anybody else? What's that mean, to rebuke? To scold, stop with emphasis and sound, and there's no doubt in what I just said type thing. He rebuked the wind and the waves. Did his voice have any power? And the men, he rose and rebuked the wind, and there was a great calm. It was stopped. You know, we've seen a calm before. You know, the windmill stopped turning. It happens. But to go from a gale to that, what do we think? Might be a tornado. We have seen occasions like that, but for the waves to instantly stop.
Like the parallel use of the term, as great as the tempest was, the calm was that great.
Good point. Good way of putting it. Of how extreme, from one extreme to the next extreme of harmful, dangerous to safe. Now the only thing is, a sailboat doesn't do you any good. No wind. I hope they had some oars, to row out, to get out of there. So anyhow, they marveled. Verse 27, the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even winds and sea obey him? Here are these apostles, young in their faith, still call him a man instead of the Christ. They call him this man. I see that just being youth in their Christian life of not referring to him as their Savior, as the Christ. What sort of man is this that even wins and waves? So I think every one of these miracles is leaving an imprint on their minds that, as Nicholas said, they're going to draw on later on. Whatever situation there is, you can almost hear them say, what would Jesus do in this situation? Did Jesus run across? Or maybe there was an application to something he did that would help me out in this situation. He was able to not be afraid when danger happened. He was able to handle that situation. He was able to help out when there was a need. This servant attitude. Well, let's read another one. Back up in Matthew chapter 8. Remember, this last one was in Matthew 25, 23, 24, 25. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter 8. When he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will. I thought that was real unique how he answered. The question was from the leper, Lord, if you will. And he answered, I will. Be clean. Before we go any further, I want to not be too descriptive of what leprosy was. This was something, if you go back to Leviticus chapter 13, you see the rules on leprosy. And it was something the high priest was trained in. The high priest was trained of how to look at someone and see if they were leprous or pre-leprous. I'm not sure if that's how they put it. But he says if you had a sore and it was reddish and pinkish, and you looked at the hair, and if the hair has turned white, that was a sign of leprosy. But if the priest looked at someone and saw the color, but there was nothing wrong with the hair, they put them in quarantine for a week, for 7 days. Put them in quarantine. Have we heard of quarantine lately? How we can look what God has and understand and relate to it. And the rest of it's gross. But there was one other, I'm not even going to bring it up. But there was a way for the priest. Okay, so the priest was involved in telling someone after he did an observation that you're clean or you're unclean. All right, we have a man right here, a leper, came to him. I say a man. Let's go with no gender here.
Touched him first.
Okay, there you go. Came to him and knelt before him Okay. Okay. Touched him. There you go. Very last verse right there. Touched him. Okay, the leper. He had to have already been pronounced by the priest as being a leper. And they had to go through a certain process. If they were around anybody close, they had to pronounce who they were. They had to say unclean, unclean, and that was an automatic sign to anybody hearing that they were a leper. They had to be removed from the town. They had to be outside of town, and they couldn't dwell in the town for fear of contagion. So here we have a leper. He came to him, knelt down, and Jesus says, I will be clean. He said these words. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that here's one of the references Nolan had brought out earlier in class. See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Remember, lepers could not interact with people. They had to say unclean, unclean. And they're down on whatever way the priest keeps track of someone that's leprous. If they did, I'm sure they did somehow. Keep track that so-and-so is leprous and he's cast out. Now, right here, first thing I'd be wanting to do is say, yay! And celebrate, and all of a sudden, how good a job does Jesus do when he heals someone? Does he go halfway? How many times have we heard that the skin is at the skin of a newborn baby, of a baby, how good God cleanses people when that happens. Here, I see him in this situation. But Jesus says, go to the priest first. He could have been accused of not doing what the priest had told him to do, is not have any interaction with anyone because you're unclean. He needed to go to the priest and get his log changed from unclean to clean. Then go and do whatever you want to do with this. And I'm thinking, I'm the priest over here, and all of a sudden this guy shows up, and I probably wouldn't recognize him. He doesn't look like, he said, I'm so-and-so. He said, no, you're not. This guy is unclean. You're clean as a baby. And all of a sudden I see the priest saying, what happened? The Messiah came. I see the word getting out just through this.
Well, there's a whole process when you look at the things.
Yeah. They had an order of things. Don't we have things like that in our society? Rules that we've got to abide by. He needed to abide by the rules because I would have thought that might have been the last thing I need to do. Sure. You need to abide by the rules of the law. You're a good point. We need to do it right. And once it's done right, then you can rejoice. You can tell whoever. But we got to do it right. Yes, sir?
This also tells me that Jesus was a man, God, he's a man, he's willing to take himself out of the crowd and go to one person. Because there was a crowd, all around. He obviously had to take time out of his busy schedule and heal him. No one around to see it. And then he says, don't tell anyone. It shows that he loved him. He loved him. He cared enough that one man that wasn't he was obviously, since he had leprosy, he was removed from the people, but Jesus cared for him. And it wasn't done for, look at me, that kind of thing. It was done because he cares for people.
Everything that we see Jesus do, it was always to the glory of the Father. Of others. That servant attitude, which hopefully we can pick up on that. Hopefully we've made it real tonight. Thank you so much. Good comments and answers. Thank you.